Margaret Whitfield sat at her kitchen table in the spring of 1952, a needle pinched between her fingers, a torn collar spread across her lap like evidence at a crime scene. Outside, the radio hummed low. She wasn't poor, she wasn't desperate. She simply believed something most of us have forgotten, that a torn shirt wasn't trash, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. What she did next with that collar, that needle, and 45 quiet minutes would end up saving her family more money in 1 year than most modern households save in 5. If you've ever wondered why your grandmother's closet outlasted yours, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand the secret system she never wrote down, but never forgot either. If this kind of forgotten wisdom speaks to you, consider subscribing and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. The cost per wear mindset. Before Margaret ever bought a single garment, she asked herself a question that modern shoppers rarely think to ask. How many times will this survive? In 1952, clothing wasn't priced by the tag alone. It was priced by its lifespan. A wool coat wasn't expensive. It was an investment stretched across 10 winters, maybe more. A cotton work dress wasn't cheap. It had to survive years of laundry, sun, and mending before it earned its place in the closet. This was the quiet math running behind every purchase decision in households across America, from Ohio farm towns to Brooklyn apartments. Susan, Margaret's neighbor 2 houses down, used to say her mother taught her to touch the seams before touching the price tag. If the stitching was loose, the fabric thin at the elbow, or the buttons flimsy, the dress was already dying before it was even bought. Housewives calculated future repairs the way we calculate monthly subscriptions today, except their math led to savings, not slow bleeding of cash. A well-made dress, mended dress, might outlast 3 cheaply made ones bought new. That single shift in thinking, buying for decades instead of seasons, quietly protected family budgets from the kind of slow financial erosion so many households feel today without understanding why. Today we call it fast fashion fatigue, this endless cycle of buying, wearing twice, and replacing. But in 1952, the goal wasn't to always look new. The goal was for something to last so well that replacing it felt almost wasteful. Modern translation, this doesn't mean buying expensive clothing today. Many affordable brands still make sturdy natural fibers. It means asking, before every purchase, will I still be wearing this in 3 years? That one question, asked at the register, can quietly rebuild the kind of financial discipline our grandmothers carried without ever needing a budgeting app. The invisible art of darning. There was a particular sound in Margaret's living room every Sunday evening, the soft, rhythmic pull of thread through wool. Darning. Almost nobody under 50 even recognizes the word today. Yet in 1952, it was as common a household skill as boiling water. A hole in a sock wasn't a death sentence for the sock. It was simply a small technical problem, and Margaret had a solution passed down from her own mother. She'd stretch the sock over a wooden darning egg, a smooth, egg-shaped tool that fit snugly inside the heel, and weave new thread back and forth across the hole, over and under, until it formed a tiny woven patch nearly invisible to the eye. It took skill, it took patience, but it took almost no money at all. Sweaters received the same careful attention. A moth hole near the elbow wasn't caused to throw the sweater away. It was caused to sit by the radio for 20 minutes with a needle and matching yarn. Linda, another housewife on Margaret Street, kept a small tin labeled Mending thread filled with leftover yarn scraps from every sweater she'd ever owned, organized by color, ready for exactly this moment. This wasn't seen as poverty. It was seen as competence. A woman who could darn a sock invisibly was admired the way we might admire someone today who can fix their own car engine. Practical, resourceful, quietly impressive. Modern translation: you don't need a darning egg today. A smooth wooden spoon or even a light bulb works in a pinch, and mending kits are sold for under $10 at most craft stores. The skill itself takes under an hour to learn from a short tutorial. What made 1952 different wasn't access to tools. It was the belief that repairing something well was worth the time, a belief that quietly protected household budgets from constant replacement spending. Turning collars and cuffs. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because what Margaret did with that torn collar on her kitchen table wasn't mending in the traditional sense at all. It was something cleverer. Men's dress shirts in 1952 wore out in a very specific, predictable place: the collar and the cuffs, where fabric rubbed against skin and starch broke down fibers daily. But the body of the shirt, the back, the sides, the tail tucked into trousers, often stayed nearly untouched, protected under a jacket or vest for years. So housewives developed a technique called turning. Margaret would carefully unpick the collar entirely from the shirt, flip it inside out so the unworn underside now faced outward, and stitch it back on. Instantly, the shirt looked new again. No frayed edge, no yellowed wearline, simply a fresh-looking collar sewn from fabric that had barely seen daylight. Cuffs received the exact same treatment. It sounds almost too simple to work, and yet it extended the life of a dress shirt by another full year or more, at the cost of 30 minutes and a spool of thread. Patricia, whose husband worked at the local bank and needed to look sharp 5 days a week, turned his shirt collars every 8 to 10 months like clockwork, treating it as routine as ironing. Nobody at the bank ever noticed. Nobody was meant to. Modern translation: while most of us don't sew today, the underlying principle still applies directly to modern spending. Inspect what's actually worn out before discarding the whole item. A jacket with a torn lining doesn't need replacing, only relining. A pair of jeans worn only at the knee can be patched for $5 instead of replaced for $60. The 1952 mindset wasn't about restoring perfection. It was about restoring function, quietly, invisibly, and repeatedly. The flour sack fashion era. Now, here's a detail that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Walk into Margaret's kitchen pantry in 1952, and you'd find something curious about the flour sacks stacked in the corner. They weren't plain burlap. They were printed with soft floral patterns, gingham checks, and pastel stripes, because flour and feed companies had discovered something clever. Housewives were sewing empty sacks into clothing, curtains, and dish towels, so manufacturers began printing them like fabric on purpose, hoping to win customer loyalty through the pattern alone. Margaret's youngest daughter, Emily, owned 2 summer dresses sewn entirely from empty flour sacks, and not a single classmate at school could tell the difference between her dress and one bought at the department store. This wasn't seen as shameful improvisation. It became something close to a quiet competition among housewives, comparing whose sack fabric made the prettiest apron or the softest baby blanket. Nothing in the kitchen went to waste, not the flour itself, and certainly not its packaging. Nancy, who ran a small farmhouse with 4 children, used sacks for everything from dish towels to patchwork quilts that took an entire winter to complete by hand, each square telling a small story of a dress worn years before. This era represents something almost unthinkable by today's standards, an entire supply chain, from wheat mill to sewing basket, built around the assumption that nothing should be discarded until every possible use had been extracted from it. Modern translation: today's version isn't literally sewing with flour sacks, but the underlying habit still translates directly: repurposing containers, glass jars, sturdy boxes, and worn textiles before buying new storage or organizational products. The 1952 mind never asked, "What should I throw away?" It asked, "What can this still become?" That single mental shift, applied to a modern household, quietly reduces both clutter and spending at the same time. Mending as a social event. But here's where the story deepens into something far more emotional than fabric and thread. On Thursday evenings, Margaret's living room filled with 5 or 6 women from the neighborhood, each carrying a basket of mending, gathering for what everyone simply called the sewing circle. It wasn't just about fixing clothes, it was community disguised as chores. Barbara brought a stack of her husband's socks needing darning. Deborah brought a torn dress hem. Karen, recently widowed, brought almost nothing to mend at all. She came mostly for the conversation, the warmth of the room, the sense of not being alone with her thoughts on a quiet Thursday night. While needles moved, information moved too. Which grocery store had eggs on sale that week? Which butcher gave a fair cut for a fair price? How to stretch a pot roast across 2 dinners instead of 1? This wasn't gossip in the way we imagine it today. It was an informal, spoken network of household economics, passed woman to woman, completely free, completely trusted, built entirely on relationships rather than advertisements. Nobody was selling anybody anything. Everyone in that room understood something modern households have quietly lost, that financial wisdom spreads faster and sticks longer when it's shared face to face over shared work rather than absorbed alone through a screen. By the time the mending baskets emptied and the coffee cups went cold, every woman left with both her clothes and her confidence a little more repaired. Modern translation, this doesn't mean starting a literal sewing circle, though some communities still do. It means recognizing the value of trusted, in-person financial conversations, a budgeting book club, a monthly coffee with friends focused on real talk about saving, rather than isolated scrolling through financial content alone. The 1952 sewing circle proves something timeless. Shared discipline is easier to sustain than solitary discipline. The 1950s Make, Do, and Mend kit. Every housewife in 1952 owned one object that modern households have almost entirely lost, a sewing basket, but not the decorative kind sold in stores today. This was a working tool, battle-tested and organized with military precision. Margaret's basket sat on the shelf beside her kitchen table, always within reach, and inside it lived a small, specific universe. A pincushion shaped like a tomato, bristling with pins of every size. Spools of thread in black, white, and navy, the 3 colors that matched almost anything. A thimble worn smooth from years of use. Fabric scraps saved from worn-out clothing, sorted by color and texture, waiting for their second act as patches. Buttons rescued from shirts too far gone to save, kept in an old tin that once held peppermints. A seam ripper. Sharp scissors reserved only for fabric, never for paper, because a housewife who dulled her fabric scissors on wrapping paper earned a stern look from her mother-in-law. This kit cost almost nothing to assemble and almost nothing to maintain, yet it functioned as an entire repair department for the household. Clothing, curtains, quilts, even furniture upholstery when necessary. Jessica, a younger housewife on Margaret Street, once ran out of thread mid-project and simply walked 2 doors down to borrow a spool rather than driving to a store, an errand nearly unthinkable in most modern neighborhoods today. This kit represented something quietly powerful, self-sufficiency, stored in a single basket, ready at a moment's notice, requiring no trip to a store, no waiting for delivery, no unexpected expense. Modern translation? A modern version costs under $20. Needles, thread in a few neutral colors, a seam ripper, spare buttons, and a small fabric glue for emergencies. Keeping this basket stocked and visible rather than buried in a closet quietly rebuilds the same instinct 1952 households relied on. Fix it first, before you even consider replacing it. Hand-me-down transformation. Margaret's oldest son, Robert, outgrew his winter coat every single year, the way children always do. And yet the family never once bought a new coat for her younger son, Thomas, during those years. Instead, Robert's coat traveled quietly down the hallway to Thomas's closet, but not before Margaret spent an evening transforming it first. She'd move the buttons over slightly to account for a smaller frame. She'd shorten the sleeves with a hem that could later be let back out as Thomas grew. Sometimes she'd add a small pocket cut from scrap fabric, just different enough that Thomas never felt like he was simply wearing his brother's old coat. He felt like he was wearing his own. This transformation process extended far beyond coats. Dresses were taken in at the waist for a younger sister, then let back out 2 years later as she grew into them. A boy's outgrown trousers became shorts for his younger brother. The worn knees simply cut away and hemmed clean. Deborah, who had 5 children across a wide age range, ran what her family jokingly called the relay system. Clothing passed continuously down the line, each piece slightly modified at each handoff, rarely purchased new more than once every few years. This wasn't viewed as deprivation by the children involved. It was simply how households functioned, and children absorbed the lesson early. Clothing had value beyond its original owner, and adapting something to fit you was a normal, even satisfying part of growing up. Today's translation, this might look like swapping children's clothing within a neighborhood group, a small alteration budget instead of a full replacement budget, or simply learning basic hemming to extend a growing child's wardrobe by another season. The 1952 relay system quietly solved a problem modern families still face today. Children who outgrow clothes faster than most budgets can comfortably absorb. The psychology of pride in repair. Here's the twist that surprises modern viewers more than any other detail in this story. In 1952, wearing visibly repaired clothing wasn't something to hide. It was something to display with quiet confidence. A neatly darned elbow patch on a wool sweater wasn't a mark of poverty. It was a mark of skill, care, and household competence, worn almost the way a badge is worn. Margaret never once apologized for a mended hem or a patched knee on her children's trousers. In fact, quite the opposite happened. Other housewives sometimes complimented visible mending, asking who taught her the stitch pattern, admiring the neatness of the repair, the way someone today might admire a well-organized kitchen. This represents a psychological shift almost entirely reversed from today's culture, where a small hole or loose thread often triggers immediate embarrassment and an impulse to simply buy something new rather than repair the old. Mary, whose husband had been laid off briefly from the local mill, wore a beautifully mended cardigan to church every Sunday for 2 years, and not once did anyone in the congregation view it as a sign of struggle. If anything, it was viewed as dignity, evidence of a woman taking care of her household with skill, rather than simply spending her way through problems. This cultural difference explains something deeper about financial stress today. When repair carries shame, people avoid it, and avoidance leads directly to unnecessary replacement spending. When repair carries pride, as it did in 1952, people lean into it, and that lean quietly protects the household budget year after year. Modern translation, this shift starts small, wearing a visibly mended garment without over-explaining it, complimenting a friend's thrifted or repaired outfit sincerely, and separating self-worth from the newness of what's worn. The 1952 mindset proves that financial discipline sticks longest when it's paired with genuine pride, not quiet shame. Fabric salvage techniques. By this point in the story, you might assume Margaret eventually reached a garment too far gone to save. And you'd be right, except, even then, nothing truly went to waste. When a shirt finally wore through completely, beyond even darning or turning, it entered its final and most resourceful stage, salvage. Margaret would lay the shirt flat across her kitchen table one last time, scissors in hand, and carefully harvest everything still useful. Buttons went into the peppermint tin for future repairs. A zipper, still working smoothly, was unpicked and saved for a future skirt or trouser project. Any patch of fabric still strong and unfaded, usually from under the arms or along the back, areas protected from direct sun and friction, was cut into clean rectangles and saved for future patches on other garments. What remained after salvage, the truly unusable scraps, still had one final purpose left: quilting, or simple household rags for cleaning, ensuring even the last thread of a garment served the family before disappearing entirely. Modern translation. Today, this looks like saving buttons and zippers from clothing before donating or discarding it, cutting old cotton t-shirts into cleaning rags instead of buying paper towels, and viewing worn textiles as raw material rather than simple trash. The 1952 salvage habit quietly reduced spending on small household items that modern families now purchase new again and again without a second thought. The 1952 salvage habit quietly reduced spending on small household items that modern families now purchase new again and again without a second thought. The death of fast fashion, and the real lesson this entire story has been quietly building toward. In 1952, clothing was engineered fundamentally differently than it is today. Tighter stitching, sturdier natural fibers like wool and heavy cotton, reinforced seams designed specifically to survive repair rather than resist it. A modern fast fashion shirt, by comparison, is often stitched with a single seam line, synthetic thread that frays quickly, and fabric so thin that even a careful repair sometimes fails to hold. This wasn't an accident. Clothing in 1952 was priced and manufactured with the assumption that it would be mended, not discarded, while much of today's clothing is manufactured with the opposite assumption, that it will simply be replaced within a season or two. This is the real difference between fast fashion and what economists now sometimes call durable goods culture. And it's the quiet reason so many modern closets feel simultaneously overflowing and unsatisfying at the same time. Margaret never once felt that way about her closet. She owned fewer clothes than most of us do today, yet felt more secure in what she owned because every piece had been chosen, cared for, and repaired with intention rather than accumulated carelessly. That, in the end, is the lesson hidden inside every darned sock, every turned collar, every flour sack dress sewn at Margaret's kitchen table back in 1952. Financial security was never really about having more. It was about deciding what was enough, caring for it well, and trusting your own two hands before reaching for your wallet. The peace that came from that decision quietly outlasted every trend, every sale, every must-have item of its era. And perhaps that peace is exactly what so many of us are quietly searching for today, without realizing it has a name at all: contentment, earned through care. Do you think families today would spend less if visible repair, instead of constant replacement, became something to feel proud of again? If this forgotten wisdom resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories like Margaret's. Leave a comment sharing which part surprised you most, and share this with someone who still believes in fixing things before replacing them.